Hi, my name's Jessie Krapser, and I will be presenting for Team 2 from page 327 through 328 of our text on bridging the generational communication gap. Let's get started by talking about the differences in communication styles. The younger generation has a more rapid method of communication, while the older generation is thorough in their ways of communication. The younger generation tends to be more informal with verbiage and communication, while the older generation is very formal in how they talk to people. The younger generation is much faster with communication. They're texting, they're blogging, they're instant messaging, while the older generation prefers slower methods of communication like writing letters. The bottom line is mixing these two communication styles in the workplace causes many difficulties. For this case study, we have several different scenarios we were assigned. Scenario 1 is about Mark, who is a new manager with a company. Mark wants to network with other managers, so he travels out to the cafeteria with his cell phone in hand. He sits down at a table with Kent, who has been a manager at the company since the 1970s. Now, Kent's telling the story to the other managers, who are very attentive to the story. And while Mark's sitting listening to the story, he starts texting friends right in front of Kent. Kent stops his story and says, I can see that I'm boring you, and leaves the table. So Mark's reaction to that is he live tweets about the encounter, and he ventures around the cafeteria to look for another group. It's there that he encounters Maria, who suggests that he puts his phone away in order to make a good impression. But instead, Mark just returns to his office. Now the questions for scenario 1. The first question is, what kinds of barriers to communication can you find? Well, the biggest barrier we found was due to the age difference, which is considered an interpersonal barrier. Another interpersonal barrier that presented was nonverbal, the fact that Mark was messing with his phone. The younger generations are used to communicating quickly and by multiple means, such as texting, blogging, Twitter, and Facebook. They communicate short but continuous ways, while the older generation communicates face-to-face and in print, and are not as familiar with the numerous ways technology has changed the communication game. Our next question is anybody at fault? Now, we believe both Mark and Kent are at fault. We say this because Kent had the opportunity to communicate with Mark why he was frustrated. Similarly, Mark could have apologized and asked why texting made him so upset, which would then teach both Mark and Kent how to work on the generational barrier by simply just communicating with each other. Scenario 2 of our case study is about Whitney, who's 28, and she's the head of the marketing department. She's only been on the job for 6 months. During her tenure, she's introduced changes to group interaction with the intentions to make planning a lot more efficient. Now, her group members are ages from 20 to 40, everyone except for Brett, who is approaching retirement. So Whitney's had some problems communicating with Brett. Brett does not participate in any texting, blogging, or online planning. Brett has in the past had a reputation as a great contributor and asset to the department, according to Whitney's predecessor. But Whitney can't figure out why Brett isn't living up to her expectations. Now, let's analyze scenario 2. Our first question is, what kinds of barriers to communication can you find? We find both interpersonal and cultural barriers exist. Whitney and Brett are from different generations and communicate very differently. Brett is not familiar with the new technology requirements that his new boss would like him to use, while Whitney is not giving him the option to communicate with her or the team in any other way. The next question is anybody at fault? And again, we believe both people are at fault. Whitney is at fault for not sitting down and asking Brett what it is that is preventing him from providing knowledgeable feedback, and Brett's at fault for not crossing over the line and communicating that her style of communication isn't working. And our third question is, do you think that both age and gender differences were factors? We believe the biggest factor in the communication problem is age, and that is the only factor. Brett is close to retirement, and people in his generation tend to communicate more face-to-face and with paper, not in blogs or online. They usually communicate by phone rather than text. The way that his new boss would like him to communicate is not familiar to him due to the age difference. Now, to summarize, in both scenarios, how can Mark, Kent, Whitney, and Brett improve their communication skills? It's very important to learn the other types of communication because with different generations, not everyone wants to text or email. With that, it is also important to keep a professional barrier and respect the other generations. We may be different, but we can still form a good workplace by striving for success and learning how to deal with the communication barrier. Lastly, we would emphasize your listening skills because people will make hits if they feel offended. So make sure to be respectful of that. A great example in scenario 1 is when Maria and Sam talk to Mark about him texting and how that will reflect on his performance.